Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest. We got Joseph Malone, and he's got a really fantastic story about just raw courage, authenticity, truth, vulnerability. He's doing a lot of great things, and I'm happy to have him on the show, showcase his work, and inspire others. So, Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Christopher.
Yeah, so kind of talk about your journey. It looks like you had a military background and you're doing a lot of great things and a lot of self-development, self-improvement, and we'll dive right into the conversation.
Yeah, I did 13 years in the Marine Corps total, and it's kind of funny because it's like a finance podcast, and I think to myself, I still remember as clearly as yesterday when I was in boot camp, and you get like I think $1,100, twice a month. And the first paycheck that we got, we had to go right to the little store that like to buy a bunch of uniform items and basically spent 800 of the $1,100 we had gotten. And so that's a funny little financial memory for me. But I I did 13 years and got out, and I was up and down, left and right in terms of finances. And
Uh,
ultimately I had to make some very serious life changes in order to, one, keep myself from ending my own life, but two, to really develop some sort of financial stability so I could live in society. So it's been a very tumultuous experience, but great nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah, what's really interesting because I love this idea, like I said, I love bringing people with just really diverse backgrounds, great stories to showcase. So we'll talk about, from hardship to hope and, journey from trouble past, and now you're a successful CEO, you're founder of Southern Cross Safety Academy, inspiring others. And can you share pivotal moments and decisions that help you transform your life from its lowest point to where you are today?
Yeah, probably a lot, to be honest. So growing up, I just got involved in the wrong crowd at a very early age. I was shooting up dope by 16, 17 years old. And that just happened because I was chasing girls and the girls were hanging out with these older, like creepy pedophile like guys. But you just don't think about that when you're 15 and there's some 30-year-old that wants to buy you booze. Oh, hey, by the way, they also smoke crack. And it's just, you're not really that educated on who they really are at that time. And so I ended up in that environment, ended up losing a few friends to drug overdoses before I was 18. And then I watched my best friend join the Marines, which is why I ended up going into the Marine Corps in general. And that watching him graduate boot camp was one of those moments at that time in my life. Of course, when you lose a friend at an early age, you kind of reflect on your life choices, but it almost spirals you further into that abyss. And then watching my best friend graduate Marine Corps boot camp, seeing the transformation that took place for him, I knew that I had two options. I could either go with him or I could stay behind forever and most likely not ever grow and evolve with him in life. And so, exactly 1 year to the day that he left, I left. And then, exactly 1 year to the day that he had graduated, I was graduating boot camp. And so, that would be some moments early on in my life. Unfortunately, I had a lot of interesting experiences through my time in the military, just relationships. I was in an affair with a woman for many years who was cheating on her husband, thinking that she was going to leave, never did.
Hmm.
And when she got pregnant by another man, not her husband, not me.
Hmm.
She had left her husband. She had left her husband at that time and moved in with me. So she eventually finally did, but then she got knocked up by another guy while I was going on deployment. That was another really huge moment where I started to just kind of like question, like, what am I doing relationally?
Mhm.
And then a few years later, when I was leaving the military, I dealt with a lot of survivor's guilt, a lot of depression. I started abusing the prescription medication that I was given. I was on 26 different medications. I had suffered some concussions, and
Mhm.
it, it was I had a lot of those nights where you just have the gun in your mouth and it's just a matter of pulling the trigger a little bit harder.
Mhm.
That really resonated with me to be like, man, why, like, how do you go from somebody who even though you've had like these experiences, you've always been a very happy, positive person, trying to always make the best out of things. And now here you are crying on a beach, homeless, dead broke, wanting to kill yourself. I just knew something wasn't right. And so I was very lucky to have those moments of clarity, and a couple of friends have some conversations with me, which allowed me to build momentum in a more positive context.
Yeah. Yeah. And because so kind of like because I have a lot of guests who either have addiction or they had like basically, either, a lot of emotional trauma, and then basically they use these experiences to do what you're doing. And so kind of talking about this idea. So public violence is a huge thing. Every day you turn on the news, well, I actually stopped watching the news, but you hear
Yeah.
about these gun shootings and like mass shootings. And in light of your experience and training, what are some practical steps individuals and communities can take to prevent and respond to public violence, workplace violence as well? That's actually on the rise, and school shootings, all of this.
Yeah. So for some context, I got kicked out of three high schools growing up. So I definitely am no stranger to the penalty systems in high schools, at least what they were back then versus what they are now. I've talked to over 60 schools trying to work with them specifically for violence prevention. None of them would work with me. I've been told that I'm a white male police officer, even though I'm not a cop. But that just gives you perspective on some of the education administrators in the nation now. I guess race matters,
Uh,
but the biggest, most important thing that I notice for kids and for adults, kids, it's purposelessness. For adults, it's purposelessness.
mm,
And there's a lot of neuroscience that goes into this. When we talk about the human neurochemical disposition, all emotions, all feelings are a concoction of hormones, endorphins, and neurochemicals within your body. So when you feel happy, that's a certain combination. When you feel sad, that's a certain combination, so forth and so forth. Everything is a neurochemical disposition, everything that you feel within your body, which therefore then influences the choices you make. And then the
mm,
choices that you happen to make then therefore influence the life around you. So when we find ourselves isolated from other human beings, the brain actually produces neurochemicals, neuropeptides, specifically tachykinin called TAC2. And that is directly associated with aggressiveness, agitated behavior, erraticism. And this comes when we are physically isolated from other people because we are social creatures. And the only thing that cures that development of that neuropeptide, that cures the rewiring, the negative structuring of the brain, is positive social engagement with other human beings. It's the only thing. Positive social engagement with other human beings.
mm,
And when we teach kids that men can get pregnant, that, women can have male genitals, right there off the bat, we are confusing the hell out of our youth who are already struggling to find their purpose in life. And I don't know if you remember what it was like for you as a kid, but for me, it was just like, dude, like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? Who am I as a human being? Now you want to throw that into the mix of everything, and it's just like, oh, great, good luck figuring anything out. You know, women have penises, like that stuff is just crazy. And there's a lot of reasons as to why I believe that that narrative is being pushed out specifically to the American people within American society, American culture. It's to destabilize the nuclear family. That's a kind of a different podcast in itself, I think, based off of our foreign enemies. But the point of this all is that when we confuse kids, we make it difficult for them to develop a sense of purpose. And when we isolate our children from one another, whether it be via social media, computers, or actual restricting their ability to see their peers through COVID and stuff, then we're creating the perfect neurochemical concoction within them to do what? Be erratic, explode, and do something very violent and destructive. Now, this also bleeds over into the adult livelihood. When we are isolated from our fellow peers, I just did a podcast on the effects of workplace violence and how it's going remote. And by
mm,
that, I mean, if we continue to promote a remote work setting and we don't have integrated positive social engagement with our peers, what we're going to see is workplace violence, but it's going to look more like public shootings. It's going to look more like the person who goes to the grocery store and shoots it up, as opposed to the targeted workplace. So, how do we begin to shift the tide of erratic and violent behavior within society? And it comes down to, first and foremost, letting kids deal with some adversity on the playground. We've shielded them from bullying so much that they don't even know how to deal with those types of conflicting emotions. I mean, I've been beat up, punked out, so many times as a kid. I had to learn how to persevere through that tide of like confusion within myself. Like, who am I? Developing confidence, developing yourself, developing purpose. And we also need to encourage, especially in the workplace, positive social interaction and engagement through leadership training, team building exercises, communication exercises. And if we could begin to bring our children together and allow them to just be kids and not have to confuse them and allow them to deal with some level of adversity. I don't like bullying. I've dedicated my life to stopping bullies, literally. Like, that's what I do. But I do believe that adversity breeds strength, and we need to give kids the ability to think for themselves and to behave in their own manner according, and to fail and to succeed. And if we can allow kids to develop a sense of purpose at an earlier age and a sense of identity, then that will carry over into the adult workforce. But for the adult workforce now, and for public and violence now, and again, this is a very short, very condensed answer. We need to really focus on making the workplace as fun as it can be and having a culture that promotes positive social engagement with one another and leadership and team building, and really works on developing the strengths and weaknesses of one another. That is a very niche way that we could approach it. We could talk about news, media, external conditioning, and the effects that when we look at something repetitively every single day, what that does to our brain and our body. But I think I'll kind of just leave it as succinct as I possibly can for now.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. And so you then because public violence, that's one thing in and of itself. And then talk about mental resilience and situational awareness. And you emphasize the importance of these two traits in personal safety, and how can an average person develop these skills, and what are some common misconceptions about them?
Yeah, mental resiliency. I think the biggest misconception about mental resiliency, especially in our modern society, is that people equate mental resiliency to one's ability to block out things that they just don't want to deal with. They call it being triggered. Well, that triggers me. So I don't, that shouldn't be around me at all. When actually it's the opposite. Like that's such a baby response. When you look at the majority of the world that is not as well constructed as the United States is, they don't have the luxury of crying about every single little thing that upsets them. They're literally dealing with genocide all over the place, like high crime rates, organized crime. I mean, it's, survival. Just even getting food and clean water is literally their daily task. So if you call somebody a loser, like, they've got way more important things to worry about.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's been misconstrued as like, oh, we just need to block everything out that triggers us. How do we develop mental resiliency? The best way to do it is it starts with your own self-talk. The way that our brain forms habits, habitual behavior, is because it wants to conserve energy. Keep us safe from harm, conserve energy, two priorities of the brain, the primitive part of the brain, the non-conscious part of your brain. So, in an effort to conserve energy, the brain, when it consciously thinks about things, burns more calories than any other organ in the body, like it's a caloric burning machine. So, what does it do? It programs information into the subconscious mind, the habitual behaviors that we have. A lot of people liken this to, they drive to and from work every day. They have that day, they're a little bit jaded, and then all of a sudden they're leaving work and they're like, bam, they're at home, they spaced out. They're like, how did I even get here? Well, it's because you've done it so many times over and over again that your subconscious was able to take over, put you on autopilot. You hit the blinker, you made safe turns, but consciously you didn't have to think about it at all. The same process happens for our self-talk, which creates our own internal belief system. So if you're dealing with adversity every single day of your life, you're like, oh, this is insane. Oh, this is bullshit. Oh, this is driving me crazy. And you're just breaking down maniacally inside of your own head, then what you're doing is you're creating the habitual thought process of somebody who's maniacal. Now, if you want to change that, you need to consciously intervene against it and begin to implement systems and techniques that I frankly have done many times in my life, which have carried me to the point where I'm at now. And I've helped other people do this as well. And the best way to do that, to consciously intervene against those negative thought patterns, isn't in the moment. It's before that. It's when you start your day with intention. So
Mm,
for me, I get up every morning at like about like 2:45 to 3:15, somewhere in between that window. I have an
mm,
alarm that has like a window, so it like wakes me up when I'm not in REM sleep, hopefully.
yeah.
But you got to start it off with intention. Get yourself up early. I always recommend at least 4:55 before 5 a.m. Then you drink a tall glass of water. My clients look at me like I'm nuts when I tell them to drink a tall glass of water for the first week. That's your only task. They're like, what? And I'm like, yes, because you're beginning to mold and restructure and rewire neurons in your brain that start your day off with intention. And when you start your day off with intention and you accomplish those goals, you're building momentum in a positive direction. I call this the realignment. So we have the true self, which is the maximum version potential of ourself in this life. And then we have the actual self. And the actual self falls further and further from the true self. With every promise that we break, with everything we say we're going to do that we don't do. Oh, I know I should do this, but I don't do that. When every piece of garbage food that you eat, with every bad negative thought that you have, dishonest thought that you have, every lie that you tell, it's all starting to edge the actual self further from the true self. And the area in between, the dissonance in between, is where angst is. Angst is the all-encompassing term for depression, anxiety, anger, frustration. And so when we start our day off with intention and we start accomplishing those wins, we begin what I call the realignment process. And we're starting to realign our actual self towards the true self. And we're lessening the space in between. And as we lessen that space in between, we begin to feel better about ourselves. We hold more confidence within ourselves because we believe in ourselves more. And so as we begin to build that momentum, we're starting to develop mental resiliency. Because remember, the body wants to conserve energy. It doesn't want to do anything. That's why laying around is so easy for most people. So when you have to consciously start your day off with intention, consciously accomplish the tasks and goals that you've set forth. And then the third, like the biggest one in terms of intention, is physical exercise. You have to put yourself through physical hardship, because that right there is the most difficult thing anyone can do. You're going against all the survival mechanisms in your brain to conserve energy. You're burning energy. You're hurting yourself. You're getting sore. You're getting the joints moving. But also, ironically, at the same time, you're creating the neurochemical disposition in your body as one of positivity and love and openness.
Mm,
Like, it's so crazy how this works, where we're so depressed and fuddled and we just keep cycling downwards. But the moment we start to move with intention, the moment we start to consciously intervene against those negative thought patterns, those negative thought dispositions, we actually create the neurochemical disposition in our body associated with happiness, love, kindness, which is the exact opposite of anger, frustration, violence. And you can't have, they're mutually exclusive. You can't have both in the body at the same time. And so as we begin to persistently and consistently maintain that daily discipline, we're intervening against that negative thought process. And
mm.
that right there, my friend, is the process of building true mental, emotional, and physical resiliency, because they all come together. You really can't do one without the others.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Especially because like putting your body through like sprints, just like, putting it through physical hell, it kind of makes it more resilient and stronger. If you're running a business or managing a team, you could think you're you can think clearer, you're sharper, you're gonna pay attention to your diet, all these things that you were talking about, you're feeling and which creates your habits and your behaviors and ultimately your ultimate outcome. Really, I love this idea of starting the day out with intention. How can people check out your social media, reach out to you, see the work that you're doing? I know you do a lot of public speaking and keynotes and contact you.
Yeah, Instagram, Joseph Malone official. That's the one I would say that I'm most active on. It's not my biggest. The biggest one's TikTok, but I don't even know what my name is on TikTok, to be honest. And then joemalonetraining.com. That's the new website that we're building out right now. That's where we have the Lethality University registration, where we walk people through this process, and I work with clients one on one, and we help them to stop their downward cycle and to level themselves out, and then build that mental, emotional, physical resiliency back upwards towards that realignment. Yeah, JM Training is the TikTok. Thanks for that, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah. And for all the audience out there, let's thank Joe for coming on, sharing a really incredible story, transformation, turnaround, all of his ideas, really inspiring. All of his resources will be in the links and show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Cool. Thanks, Christopher. Appreciate it, man.